Welcome to the Intentional Leader Podcast presented by Reenergize Professional Coaching. We appreciate you listening in and learning with us. The stories and leadership tips you hear will help you become a great leader. Listen intentionally. Now, to our host, Sean Olson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast. This is the podcast where you hear the real stories of normal people just like you who have become extraordinary leaders. You'll get valuable tips and lessons on how you can grow and develop into the best leader that you were created to be. When leaders are intentional, lives are changed. I'm your host, Sean Olson. I am an author, speaker, podcast host, and executive coach. And today we are all about coaching, listeners. And so I really hope you tune in and listen into this because you're going to learn a lot about coaching, the impact of coaching. As our guest today is Susan Britton from California. And as I introduce her, I want to remind you, listeners, hit that subscribe button so you know when every single episode drops and you can stay informed on the audio version on all of your platforms or through YouTube. Susan Britton's our guest today. Susan is the founder and CEO of the Academies of Coaching, and her academy has taught thousands of coaches across all the continents of our world and making an impact with them. And she really focuses in on the neuroscience-informed coaching, which we're going to dive into today, a very interesting topic. She is also the author of 7 books, but more than that, just like me, just like the rest of you, she is a normal person that wants to make an impact on the people that are brought in front of her. Susan, it is an honor to have you on the Intentional Leader Podcast. Welcome.
Thank you, Sean. So happy to be here.
Absolutely. I'm glad to have you on here. I'm excited about a day of talking about coaching, one of my greatest passions. And Susan, you know, every episode we want to learn about our guest. We want to hear about their professional journey because our listeners can tap into that and say, hey, I'm just like her. I can do that too. So kind of give us a walk through your professional journey and the leadership lessons learned along the way.
Yeah, sure. So farm girl from a tiny little farming town called Firebaugh, California, population about 2,000 at the time that I was growing up there. So my dad was a farmer and we lived out in the country, and I was thinking about what was the leadership lesson that I learned there. And I learned an agrarian work ethic from we, right?
Yeah.
And that was a beautiful leadership lesson. My dad was in charge of a huge ranching farming operation, like 10,000 acres. So it wasn't a tiny thing, but so there was a lot of leadership that he demonstrated in national and state volunteer work and boards, et cetera, along with managing this large ag operation. So I tell people my first real job, other than working in my dad's office in the summers, my first real job was working as a secretary. I will date myself because that term is hardly even used these days, in a cantaloupe packing shed. I had turned old enough to get my driver's license, and I drove to my first job in the summers, and it was 7 days a week, and it was 12, 14, sometimes 16-hour days because we were in this outdated little packing shed. It found out later that the union had burned down the good one like 3 days before. No offense to unions, but that's what happened. And so we had to move to this other little shed. And so we were putting in twice the number of hours to pack all of the melons that they had. So that, I think, added to that whole kind of agrarian work ethic, just do it. So that was an early experience for me.
So you said you're a secretary, right? But what were you actually doing in that? It wasn't, how does that play out? What were you doing in the shack then?
Yeah, so there were manifests, there was a ton of trucking. You would support the sales guys that were selling to the markets and that sort of thing. It was quite fast paced. So
so you're kind of really more just keeping the ops moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I'll tell you a quick story. One Sunday morning, a Saturday night, the sales boss said, Susan, you've been working weeks and weeks, these crazy hours. You can come in tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock instead of 6:30, 8 in the morning, right? On a Sunday. So I'm like, oh, that would be so nice. So I arrive at 8 o'clock in the morning on my Sunday morning off, sort of, come in late. And the second salesman tore into me about how irresponsible I was and that I should never have done that. And if I was going to be late, I should have been calling, et cetera. Those two little jokers, they were playing a joke on me and I didn't know it. And
Nice.
that helped me realize like how responsibility had just been baked into me. I was in tears. And so finally the other secretary in the office said, "You guys stop it. This is not funny anymore." So
That's awesome.
yeah, but I think that early training really made me recognize that when you think a job is done, think past it, because there's usually something else or something more that also needs to be done. And so I really learned how to, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and really become resilient and all of those things. I will tell you though, Sean, I think I overbaked that responsibility, pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of message, because I was very hesitant, and this affected my leadership down the road. I was very hesitant to ask for help. I was, I'll just do it myself. I'll do it myself.
Right.
I'll do it myself. So two sides of the puzzle there. So.
Every strength can become a weakness, right?
Totally.
Anytime it's ever done. Yeah.
Often
So where'd you move on from there?
So college. So I had always had a really great musical talent, and I had a passion for people. And so I went and became a music therapist, and I worked in mental health. I worked in inpatient psychiatric settings after I got out of college in Dallas County Mental Health. And I worked with kids and adults and all sorts of things, and I loved it. But it was also in a time when there were a lot of cutbacks happening in program funding. And so I found myself out of a job. And I thought, well, what am I going to do now? And I thought, well, music therapy is not a booming business right now. I can't really do that. So that was Texas. I moved back to California. And honestly, I was lost. I took a test to try to become a stockbroker. I didn't pass it. I did a couple. I interviewed for a couple of things. Nothing worked out. Finally, I got a job as a secretary. Now, from those musical talents, I can type like 130 words a minute easily.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I was a good secretary, and I had great English skills. I could always get my sentence structure and grammar right. I had a great aunt that tutored me when I was writing term papers. And so I found myself in the secretarial business. And I had to, not the secretarial business. I went to work for like a commercial real estate office, and then I was a legal secretary as well. Wow. I hired somebody who was going to be a word processor. So again, dating myself. This is when we have a word processor machine now.
Right.
So, but she had the vision to say, "Susan, I want to start a resume writing service. Would you want to do that with me?" And so we buddied up, and we leased for $6,000 this computer. I mean, I'm really dating myself. And
that price is crazy.
I know, it was stupid. It was highway robbery. Totally. And so we started writing resumes. We'd work during the day, and we'd then come home, and we would interview clients face to face in the living room, and got really good at resume writing. And, my first book was Resume Magic, and people it was in all the bookstores, and I was very good at it because I was able to draw out of people what they did well, and just see the beauty and the brilliance in them. But here was the turning point. It was a couple of years later, and within one little window, you kind of know when life is speaking to you. Within this little window of time, I had several clients come back and say, "Susan, remember that resume you wrote for me a couple of years ago?" "Of course, I remember it." She said, "Well, I hardly had to even interview for the job. They just hired me, but I hate my job." And then somebody else would come in and tell me the same exact story. "I hate my job." Same exact story. "I hate my job." And about this time, professional coaching was just starting to come online. And I started hearing about it. And I thought, I have got the cart before the horse, right? I've got people out there doing things that they don't love doing. It'd probably be a good idea if I understood how to really coach people towards this. So I jumped in learned about coaching, got my training, got certification, had great mentors, and started my own coach training organization for career coaching, and then later leadership coaching.
Wow. Great story. I love, though, that you're learning at every turn from the people. But I want to step back for a second when you talked about the power of your resumes, where you could tap into people, their passions, what made them stand out and shine.
Yeah.
Because that's the essence of coaching, right? Coaching is not to craft somebody or form somebody into what we think they should be as a coach, or even what their leaders think from their jobs. It's for us to pull out of them the greatness that's inside of them. And that's the joy in coaching, right? Is helping people see more in themselves than they can see, realize it for themselves, and become the best version of themselves. And that's how we describe coaching all the time. And it just drives a passion in you, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. I can remember one of my early first clients. It was a phone conversation. I got off the phone and I think I threw my pen down and I said, "This is what I was put on the planet for." I knew it in my bones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And I think the other comment I made was something like, "I can't believe I get paid for this."
Exactly.
I mean, I was like, wow, this is just a sweet thing. I love doing it. I'm good at it. It was getting good at it. It wasn't good at the beginning necessarily.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
So you said early on you're doing career coaching, and then you transitioned more to leadership coaching. A lot of people don't know the difference in the two. So talk a little bit about what you're doing in career coaching and how that really is different from leadership coaching.
I might beg to differ. I think there might be a lot of similarities. I think, let me start with leadership coaching. Mm-hmm. So leadership coaching is really, and I've heard you preach this as well, it's like self-awareness of, if I want the world to change, let's start inside here. Yeah. And recognizing like what am I capable of? What could I be capable of? Where am I growing? What's preventing me? What's stopping me? What's purposeful? What's vision oriented? And how do that I also work with people to make that happen in a collective, a shared collective? I think in a career space, there's a lot of that also happening. Like, who am I? What is possible within me? What can I make possible? What do I need to change? What can I build on, certainly? And that's where I think the neuroscience really comes in, is like, what was I sort of pre-wired from birth to do well? What was also, that's nurture or nature. What was I also nurtured to do that's added to that? Like, my nurturing was the responsibility gene. Mm-hmm. How do I then find, and this might be the difference for me in career coaching versus leadership coaching, there's still a self-leadership happening in career coaching that you have to be responsible for as the client of a career coach. Then how do I make sure that I intersect with leaders, companies, organizations, cultures, where I can also bring that nurture-nature combination and make a difference in the process?
Yeah, I love that. We've talked on the podcast before with some other guests about the nature and nurture. People always say, are leaders born or are they made? And there is no blanket answer to that. But in the end, leadership is influence, influence is behavior. So it's about behaviors and developing those leadership behaviors, but being true to yourself at the same time. And that's what I love that you're sharing about that. And that's one of the passions about coaching for me, is we coach people from all different walks of life, all over the world, different industries, but everybody's unique, and helping them find their uniqueness and that special sauce for them and how they can therefore impact other people is just, it's riveting. It's a joy to walk that journey with them.
Yeah. And I would add that the career leadership piece, I think every leader is also going to have a career component to their thinking as well. Certainly they're leading themselves and team, co-creating, connecting, co-creating together on that. And then that's usually going to lead towards some new opportunity. And so making some career decisions and thinking about the strategic complex picture and all of that.
Absolutely.
It's going to come for everybody.
Absolutely. So you ended up, go ahead.
I have one more thought too. Oh, maybe I'm getting off track, but I will say, there are some concerns with the direction that AI is happening and going. And I'm reading things with the trends and the forecasters who are saying, well, there's going to be a time when there's a big portion of the population that's not going to have work because of this.
Right.
And that could be true. And this is where I feel like that self-leadership piece that everybody needs to be thinking about being a leader. If you're not in that sort of self-leadership mindset, it could spell trouble down the road for your career.
It could. It's an interesting piece. We don't know where AI is going to take us. There's a lot of speculation out there, and people are wondering about AI in coaching, AI in leadership. I do think there's a place for AI tools in leadership, those prompts, those tips, those tools that can be brought out. But leadership is about people. And I agree with what you're just sharing, because those of us that understand how to lead ourselves and therefore can lead others are going to have a job, because there's still going to be people that need to be led. And it's just that next evolution of it. So you went on to be the founder of the Academies for Coaching. And I want to talk in a little bit about specifically what the Academies is trying to do through your training. But you talked about the idea of neuroscience-focused coaching. And I want to dive into that a little bit, because neuroscience is very popular today in many different realms, from sickness and diseases all the way to the realm of where we're going and how AI even plays into that. So in the realm of coaching and leadership, how does neuroscience play in?
So that's a fantastic question. We've been playing in this space for close to 10 years now, kind of got in early. So I was fascinated about neuroscience because I left a story out from my childhood. I think I might loop it back in.
Sure.
I was always the one in my family who supposedly wore their heart on their sleeve. Like, I was just kind of in tune with people. I knew when people were hurting. I just had a sense about those kinds of things. And my kindergarten teacher, is my kindergarten Puff the Magic Dragon story, played Puff the Magic Dragon on the little record player. And I was the only kid in the entire class that was in tears, because I realized that Puff was sorry and Jackie Paper went away, and there was sadness there.
Yeah.
Only one crying. So end of the day, my mom comes to pick me up, and the kindergarten teacher says, "Mrs. Britton, your daughter wears her heart on her sleeve." So I was also the one always bringing kittens home and stray friends for holidays and all of those things. So I get into coaching, and I love it because it's got the humane element to it. But I was also working with a ton of leaders, executives that were just constantly like, feelings have nothing to do with it. Don't tell me about emotions. Let me analyze this. And I'm like, okay, there's a big disconnect between what I know to be true about the relational trust, human piece of it, and the reality of, yes, it's got to make sense. You've got to add up. It's got to add up. You've got to have strategy, and you've got to be able to analyze it. So when neuroscience came around, I'm like, oh, finally, a way to explain how the emotional, human, relational side of things plays into the whole picture. So that's what really got me excited about it. I felt like it kind of proved that there was a reason that we should be considerate of the human element, as opposed to just micromanaging people and tell them, do this, do this, do this. So when I learned about neuroscience, one of the first things I learned was this whole biochemistry, neurochemistry side of it, which now is just common knowledge for people to understand oxytocin and dopamine and all the happy neurochemicals that sort of get you in a place where you can be trusting and creative. And then the other side of it, obviously, the cortisol and the fight, flight, and all of those spikes that kind of rob our cognitive ability and our relational ability. So that's where I see neuroscience really intersecting with coaching. First, within the coach. So we talked about self-leadership. So within a coach, I'm preaching to the choir here, you know that unless your biology is in that parasympathetic nervous system state, the peaceful state, where you've got full blood flow to your neocortex and all of those things, that's the space where people are going to be honest enough with you and lower their defenses enough with you to say, yes, there are things that I can change in my patterns. Yes, there may be values that I have held for decades that may not be serving me as well as they could, or that I've overbaked them, like the basement balcony kind of Gallup Strengths Finder, Clifton Strengths language. So that was the first thing that I saw within the neuroscience coaching intersection.
I love it. Yeah.
The second thing that I saw, so I got two C's. There's the chemistry piece of it, and then there's the circuitry piece of it. And I'll first flip over to Seth Godin, brilliant thinker. I love one of his quotes. It was something like, everyone is exactly right. If you knew what they knew, if you wanted what they wanted, if you believed what they believed, you too would do the exact same thing. So that is circuitry. That is baked in stuff into your brain, mixed in with the neurochemistry of like, am I in fight, flight? But if you as a coach can see that in yourself, you can see it in your clients, and then taking it a step further for leaders to be able to think for these employees that are doing stupid stuff, you know, why would you think that? Right. Well, everyone is exactly right. Given their neurochemistry, given their neurocircuitry, they're doing what they think is right.
Hey, Intentional Leader podcast listeners, thank you for tuning in. The intentional leader is a true thing that we really believe at Re-Energize Professional Coaching. And so we want to invite you to join us for the Intentional Leader Academy. The Intentional Leader Academy is a 6-month leadership development program. It is an open cohort, meaning people from multiple companies come in. It is hosted in the greater Columbus, Ohio area. We have people that fly in from all around the United States for this. We would encourage you to check it out for your leadership. This is not Leadership 101 at the Academy. This is like the graduate level leadership. You've been at it for a few years. You've had a few promotions. You have higher aspirations. So from those frontline managers all the way through VPs, we have them attending the Intentional Leader Academy. Check out the QR code attached here or go to reenergize.com/academy. We'd love to have you be a part of the Intentional Leader Academy. Absolutely. It's understanding everybody's coming from their place, their experiences, what's going on for them. I like that because it gives us the opportunity to really sense where people are so we can take them on a journey and take them to becoming the best version of themselves.
Yeah.
So you are now in coach training, which I love that because we need great coaches out there. And so for our listeners, I'll kind of set this up a little bit. Organizations all around the world are hiring coaches, from frontline managers all the way up through the executives and sometimes even with individual contributors now. And as companies are hiring, they have an option of going one of two ways. They can develop coaches internally in their organization to coach their people, or they can hire coaches externally to come into their organization. And now we're at a place where a lot of companies are doing both. They have an internal coaching pool and an external coaching pool. The academies really has a strong focus in developing a pool of coaches internally for organizations. So my opening question is, why did you choose that focus for the Academies of Coaching? And then what does that actually look like? How does that play out?
Yeah. So why choose the focus? I am in this because I want to see what I call blue zone cultures, work cultures across the planet. I want to see leaders who can go in to their work and recognize their own chemistry happening, their own circuitry that's operating, and that of others, and be able to manage emotions and thinking in a way that make people feel like they can trust you. Not just feel like it, but can trust you.
Yeah.
So I like playing in the leadership space because I'm a leader and because I know that that's where the greatest influence is going to happen. And I believe that on our planet at this time, there is absolutely just a changing point where it has now become acceptable to be human at work.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to help leaders be human at work and understand that you are talking to, every team member that you're talking to has some mix of chemistry and circuitry going on. And if you check in with that, if you can have conversation about that, if you can find out where somebody's like, are they in the red zone fight flight? Are they in the blue zone calm connect? If you try to get people to work when they're in red zone fight flight, you're only going to push them further into red zone flight. You're only going to lose half of their brain or more.
Mm-hmm.
We need every person working to the full capacity. And if they can't do that, our companies aren't competitive. We don't have paychecks.
Right.
We send workers home at night to spouses and children and family that are like, would you get a better job, please?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So what does it look like if a company was wanting to train 5, 10, 20 people to become internal coaches in their organization? They reach out to the academies. What does that process look like?
Yeah, so the companies that we have worked with typically have a cohort of a kind of a nucleus that they want to start with. Oftentimes, they will start with an organizational development, HR, performance development piece of their team, and then later add on leaders that are in different functional areas, so that you get a holistic approach to this. I mean, if coaching is only done in the HR space, that's not going to promote the culture broadly. Right. So, and then I will tell you, it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen with, I'm going to go to a 2-3 day training sort of thing, because that is not how your brain works. If you want your brain to get rewired, you have to have novelty, emotional resonance, repetition, and like new associations. And that wiring doesn't happen, just in a couple of days. So you have to practice. Right. So our program is really built with the brain in mind, and it takes a number of months. It can take anywhere from 6 to 12 months of training to be able to get to that first level of what the International Coaching Federation calls the ACC credential, Associate Certified Coach credential.
Yeah.
So, and all of our programs are really designed to think about, like, if you can experience what coaching is like in your classroom, then you're going to be a faster, better coach in that process. So that's what I love about the neuroscience piece of it. It's not just within the coaching. It's baked into the training piece of it, the practice piece of it, the experience.
Yeah. The coach training that I went through, there's a lot of time that's spent coaching one another, right? And so I may be the coachee for a while, bringing something to share and wanting some coaching from the coach, and you flip roles with it. What I loved about that aspect of it was, in living it and engaging in it, was understanding both sides, right? And how it's like, it was difficult for me to be the coachee, to bring a real topic and to be honest and vulnerable with somebody who you're just meeting for the first time in this course, but yet you want them to be able to help you. But making those connections and understanding the value in being a safe space for them. So let me ask you this question, because this is, as we work with companies, my company, Renaissance Professional Coaching, is an external provider of coaching to companies. So we're coming in, and a lot of the organizations we work in have an internal cadre of coaches. And depending upon the people, some people say they love the internal coaches. Some people say they're not a fan of the internal coaching because they're there every day. They're a part of the company, the organization. What would you say to somebody, kind of break down that wall, break down that fear of, I can't go talk to an internal coach in my company because maybe they feel like there's no confidentiality, or it's just about the company, not them. How have you broken that down?
Is that a question for how do you speak to the potential clients that are concerned about working with an internal coach?
Correct.
So, from coach training that agreements are a huge piece of the puzzle. And that's one of the earliest competencies in the list of of competencies that a coach learns. And so there have got to be agreements between the coach and the company about confidentiality. And there have got to be agreements between the leader and the internal coach about confidentiality and what will be shared and those sorts of things. And typically, the line is drawn if the client says, "Hey, I've been embezzling." Mm-hmm. That's an issue. Correct. Where confidential, yeah, right. So, but once there are agreements in place about that, then that's helpful to help ease that. And I think the other thing is that partnering is just one of the key words that's repeated in all of the international coaching language. International Coaching Federation language. So if there is a partnership around what leader, I'm the coach speaking to the leader, what leader do you need to feel like you can be honest here? What do we want to create? How, who have you worked with in the past where you knew that if you said something that was going to look vulnerable or embarrassing or scary, that you were going to get treated respectfully? Like, what do you need? Partner through that process, put it out there. And even though that might be a little bit scary to talk about, and that's going to raise some cortisol in that process, the fact that you're talking about it also creates trust in the midst of it.
Yeah, I love that. So I want to shift the focus for a little bit because some of our listeners may be in organizations that are considering training a cadre of coaches internally, and they could send them to the Academies of Coaching for that. The reason a lot of organizations would be fearful of it is, obviously there's always the things like the investment, but if there's a company that really wants to create a coaching culture, wants to impact their people, what do you share with them as kind of like the ROI of developing that internal cadre of coaches? What's the ROI for the company?
So the ROI is going to be the creativity and the culture and the engagement that will change. In today's society, we know, like it used to be VUCA and now it's BANI, and it's just full of anxiety, uncertainty, incomprehensibleness, and that puts people into a fight-flight state. Coaching does the opposite. Coaching can put people still into like a stretched, nervous, can I do this? Oh, I'm excited to do this, as opposed to, oh my God, I have to do this. I can't do this. And so really the ROI is the creativity and the innovation and the cooperation and the resilience that the leaders and the teams are going to receive as a result of that. If we don't have that, not just within a company, but as a species, we're not going to be able to solve the huge complexities that we're dealing with in today's society.
Absolutely. Yeah. There is a lot of return on the investments. And, people, when they hear ROI, they typically think cash. It's not always about the cash. It's about the culture. It's about the retention. It's about the effectiveness of people and them actually coming as a whole person and enjoying coming to work and enjoying the people that they work with. And that coaching culture creates that. When we're with leaders, we always do a coaching action plan. And one of the action items, vast majority of the time, is developing a coach approach. We're teaching our coachees how to be a coach because I'm a firm believer that the best leaders are coaches. And that's not going to change in the future at all. So let me ask you this prognostication question. There is technology, there is AI. We're learning more about neuroscience and the brains. What do you see as the next wave or transition in coaching?
The democratization of it, the spreading of it, and that has been a tough nut to crack for the last several decades. Is like, how do you get it out of just, the executives get it and the high post get it? That's the direction. And so for that reason, I am excited about what AI may be able to bring to the puzzle. I also feel like there's an exponential value when leaders start acting more like coaches and have a coach approach, and yes, you know, there's a blend. You got to have backbone and heart. There's a great book by that title. But once leaders start demonstrating that, then that is going to automatically create more collaboration, more innovation, more role modeling. That's probably the most important thing, the role modeling that they see within the leader. So now your culture starts acting coach approach like. And in a way, that can also help democratize that process. And then one of the colleagues that I'm just really enjoying working with, I'm a lifelong learner. So for a big birthday of mine, I won't say which number it was, I enrolled in a master's program in France to get an executive master in change using a systems psychodynamic approach. So I met people from all over the world. I was one of 2 from the US. The rest were from 17 different countries. Met a colleague there who works for a very large tech company, global tech company. And she was telling me about how within their organization, they actually have fellow coaches who will coach one another. So I'm excited to think about not just the leader role modeling and then seeing that happen so that more people act in that manner within their cultures. I'm excited about more proactive actual programs like that starting to unfold. I think if you get that, the people connection, you've got the best of AI that can be added to it, but you also get connection and relationship. And if you don't have people that you like to work with and like to talk to at work and that you trust, people aren't going to stay. So then now you've got turnover and engagement issues. So I see multiple benefits happening as the coach culture extends. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. I love that, the democratization of it, that it really is for everybody and it benefits everybody from the individual contributor all the way to the top. And it is not just for executive leadership anymore. Also, it is not punitive. People still have this huge impression that, I have to have a coach because there's something wrong with me. Coaching is developmental. It's about maximizing who you are and your ability to lead. And so I agree. Having it available and accessible is great. And I'm glad that the Academies for Coaching are there to help organizations develop that coaching culture and that cadre of coaches in a powerful way. So that's awesome. Well, Susan, it's been awesome to have you today. We finish every episode with the same question because we want practical tips for our listeners to be intentional. So what is something that our listeners can do intentionally today to be a better leader?
Yeah. So it's so simple and it's not anything new that you've heard. It is to check in with your people. But the brain needs novelty to remember something new. So the novel twist on checking in with people is, I would say, be curious about the person that you're checking in with, about why they feel like they're right. What is the chemistry and the circuitry happening in their brain in this moment that is putting them in the state of mind that they're in the way they're making meaning, the way that they're reacting or responding. Have that check-in. You don't have to tell them, hey, I'm checking in on your neurochemistry today.
Right.
But
that might push them away.
Yeah, that'd be a little red zone. I would not go there. But check in with people like, wow, what's happening in your mind? What's on your mind? How you doing? What do you need? I think really, what do you need to be your best today? And
fantastic.
That's the check-in that will help kind of align that so you get the fullest prefrontal cortex, the biggest heart, and the best results.
Absolutely. Listeners, a great tip. I hope that you enact that today and make an impact on those that you're reaching out to. Susan, it's been great to have you. Listeners, we're going to have in our show notes all the links where you can connect with Susan. And I hope that if you have an organization that's looking to develop a group of coaches, reach out to her for the Academies for Coaching. And Susan, thank you so much. Thank you for making an impact on leaders around the world. And look forward to continuing the conversation down the road.
You as well, Sean.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast presented by Renergize Professional Coaching. Be sure to see the show notes for links to Renergize Professional Coaching and links to contact our guests. Now, hit that subscribe button so that you are alerted with every new episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast.